Hello everyone, this is The Diplomat, and we are on part 26 of the Chris Watts Discovery Read-Through. We are starting now on page 564, and we will be getting into the main interview with his mistress on August 16th at Thornton Police Department. This is when the police picked up the mistress and brought her to the station so that they could have a video interview with her, in addition to the phone interview that they had previously. Victims are listed: Bella Watts, Celeste Watts, Shanann Watts. Dwayne is listed as a witness, which is the mistress's father. The mistress is listed as a witness, as well as her friend Charlotte. There is also a repeat of the property, of the handwritten cards and greeting cards, and miscellaneous clothing. And then it just references here the video interview, which is up on YouTube if you care to listen to it. And then moving down to 568 is the start of the report. Action taken. On August 16th, 2018, CBI agent Kevin Kobach and Agent Timothy Martinez met with the mistress at Thornton Police Department to speak with her regarding this case. She had previously talked with agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, however the interview was not video recorded. She asked for a ride to Thornton PD, and Agent Martinez and I picked her up near her home in North Glen, Colorado, and transported her to the Thornton Police Department for the interview. She was present with her father, who drove himself to the Thornton PD, Dwayne, and agreed to speak with us. The interview with her was audio and video recorded. The audio is attached to this report. The recorded interview is too large of a file to attach to this report, and therefore it was booked into evidence under this supplemental. Prior to starting the interview with the mistress, we had discussed with her about collecting her phone for a download. She verbally consented to a download being done on her phone relating to messages and phone logs between her and Christopher Watts. I noted the mistress was very tired during the interview, and she reported she had very little sleep over the past few days. The following is a synopsis of the interview with the mistress. For a complete record of the interview, refer to the audio or video recording. Also, transcripts for this interview were requested and will be attached to the transcript to a separate supplemental report once it has been completed. Prior to the interview with the mistress, she provided me with items of clothing belonging to Chris Watts that she no longer wanted in her home. She also provided me with a handwritten card from Watts and birthday cards he had given her. Those items were booked into evidence at the CBI Lakewood office. Copies of the cards are attached to this report. During the interview, she stated the following. She deleted all Chris's information from her phone. Chris Watts' phone number is a 910 extension. She met him early in June or May. They met at work. He did not have a wedding ring on his finger. He never mentioned he was in a relationship and did not initially mention his children. One day he told her he had 2 children. She thought it was cute that he had kids. He mentioned he did have a significant other and they were in the process of a separation. She did not know Shanann's name for a while. She thought he told her his children's names pretty early. She is a contract employee at Anadarko Petroleum in Platteville, Colorado. She works in safety in the office. Chris also works at the same location, but mainly works at the oil wells in the fields. He does come into the office most mornings. They met at work. She manages the gas monitor sensors they have, and she had seen Chris before. He came in for sensors one day, and they started talking. They had a good conversation. One day, he told her he had kids. He also said he had a wife, but they were getting separated. He told the mistress this before Father's Day in June. They had never been out on a date to this point and only talked at work. They started hanging out and met at a park near her house, East Lake No. 3. They first met at the park in the end of June or the beginning of July. This was their first meeting outside of work. They had a lot of conversations, talking every day. He was never hostile when he talked of his wife and their separation. He was always kind. To this day, she didn't see any red lights with the way that he spoke about his family. Chris is an introvert. He is reserved around other people. He enjoyed talking to her because he could get out of his shell. Around most people, he did not feel like he wanted to talk. With her, he was a little more outgoing. He was very relaxed all the time. He never really got worked up. They never had any arguments. He never lost his temper, and she never saw him mad or upset. He was always rational. He was very open and with communication and open-minded about things. He was not closed off. He was kind. They had a lot in common. They were both into fitness and healthy eating. He likes cars and is a gearhead. She likes cars as well, so they talked about stuff like that. He was willing to learn new stuff. He was very interested in what she had to share with him. They got along very well, and she never got an indication that he was having issues. They spent all of their dating time at her place or they went out. She had been to Chris's house twice. Both times were very brief. She did not feel comfortable there, and that is someone else's life and existence, so she did not want to be there. She respected that as their space. She went to the house very early in the relationship. It was right off highway in Frederick, but she doesn't know the street name. It looked like others lived there. He told her he was living in the basement. They were separated and not divorced, but Chris and his wife were getting ready to sell their house. The mistress was under the impression they were taking their time selling the house. The first time the mistress went to the house was on the 4th of July. She was helping Chris set up fitness apps on his phone. He invited her to his home. He cooked lunch, they ate, and she left. The weekend of July 14th or 15th, the mistress went to his house the second time. That time she saw a picture of his wife and one of his kids. She questioned why he would want to leave this. They talked about him working on his relationship with his wife. He said they tried working on their relationship and it was not working. Chris described his relationship with Shanann as a contractual agreement and not emotional. The mistress felt bad about not waiting for him to be completely divorced. He was reluctant to try and work on his relationship with Shanann. The mistress backed away a bit so he would try to fix his relationship with Shanann. The mistress thought he had a beautiful life going on and she wanted him to try and fix it. She always got the impression that he was a great dad to his kids. She never met his children, and he never asked her to. They had barely been dating, so the mistress was not ready to meet his children. He was in a situation that he was not completely out of yet, and she was just coming into it, so she did not think it was appropriate to meet his children. He talked to her a couple of his times via work phone. Once they realized they were interested in one another, they stopped texting on his work phone and moved the conversation to personal phones. He has 2 phones, one for work, owned by Anna Dargo, and one for personal. The mistress had one phone for work, and she does personal stuff in it. Her employer pays for her phone, but it is her phone. Chris went to North Carolina, and prior to going, he said he was going to talk to Shanann about trying to fix their relationship. He went to North Carolina in the last week of July. The mistress found out Shanann was pregnant via the newspaper articles on Monday and Tuesday. She did not know this prior. She thought if he could lie to her about this, what else could he lie to her about? This made her think about his wife being in danger. She deleted all the information on her phone, call and text logs, that had anything to do with him. She was, quote-unquote, grossed out by him. So she deleted all his stuff. It was the hurt that made her delete it, and it was the lie that made her come forward. He told her he was in the midst of a divorce, and then she found out his wife was 15 weeks pregnant, and she was hurt. She said a few more things to him, then she just cut him out of her life. The mistress met with her dad Wednesday, and they discussed getting this information to the police. She doesn't have social media accounts, so there is nothing else on her phone. There is nothing else on her phone that can help, just texting and phone logs. She sent all the pictures she sent to him via text message. She gave him the benefit of the doubt the first day when someone does not come home. Murder was never in her mind. The mistress thought Shanann just left. She gave it a day. The second day, Tuesday, August 14th, she was talking to him and he was a hot mess. That is when she cut him off. Chris went back to North Carolina to meet his family. Shanann was visiting her family with Bella and Celeste. They had been there weeks prior to him going out to North Carolina. He went in the last week of July, maybe even the last day of July. The mistress thought she had convinced him to work on his relationship with Shanann, and she figured she was going to get out of this relationship with him. They talked on the phone all the time. Chris was in the basement when they talked. When she was at his house, she saw his workout equipment and a bed in the basement. He said sometimes he would sleep upstairs when Shanann was gone. Chris made frequent communication with the mistress while he was in North Carolina. He said he told Shanann he wanted to try and fix things. He said Shanann was not willing to try and wanted him to go. He told her their relationship, Chris and Shanann's, was done. The next day he said they are putting the house up for sale when they got back. Shanann was ready to go. Chris got back and they discussed him getting an apartment or a house. Chris said he liked Brighton and he wanted a 2-bedroom apartment, one bedroom for him and one for the girls. The mistress asked him about what custody of the children they would have. Chris said he and Shanann agreed to have 50-50 custody. The mistress told him he should take time to read articles about what separation does to children. He said the children would be fine. Chris is saying he is the person trying to save the marriage, and Shanann does not want it. Chris came home in the first 2 weeks of August. They all came back together. The mistress found an apartment that was really nice for him. They had planned on looking at apartments the week of August 13th. The apartment was only for him and his family. The mistress had her own house. He had never asked her to move in with him. They never talked about marriage, meeting his kids, or cutting the mom out. It was never like that. They never had conversation of not being able to do this with Shanann or the children around. Chris did tell her he had a budget for his apartment of $1,100 to $1,400. She knew they had been in financial trouble. When she went to the house, everything in there was very nice. He had an expensive Lexus. She knew he does not make enough to pay for all that stuff. She considered Shanann a sales representative, but the mistress didn't know how much Shanann made. Chris said she made close to the same amount of money as he did. Chris never discussed his bankruptcy with his mistress. He said Shanann spends most of the money. He was frustrated Shanann had bad spending habits. The mistress thought the Lexus was Shanann's. She didn't think they owned any other cars. Chris had his Anadarko truck, but cannot drive it when not at work. He said Shanann wanted everyone to think they lived a certain way and they could not afford it. He was never mean or hostile when he mentioned it. He told the mistress that he and his Shanann were housebroke all the time. She asked if his lifestyle was sustainable and he said no. He never told her where his kids went to school. He never discussed the cost of daycare. Chris said Shanann was quote-unquote bossy. The mistress thought he was saying his voice is not heard when he voices his opinion. He said Shanann never acknowledged him. He said he addressed it, and it seems like she is not interested anymore. He talked about their relationship lasting as long as it has because of their children. Chris said he and Shanann have had communication issues for 6 years. Chris had never mentioned Shanann was pregnant in any of conversation with the mistress. He lied to her because she would never have wasted time on him in the first place. Chris never talked bad about Shanann being a bad mother. When he came back from North Carolina, she saw him a few times. She saw him last Wednesday and this Saturday, August 11th. He wanted to see her more, but she wanted her space. Wednesday he came to her house. On Saturday they went to the Lazy Dog off 144th and I-25. They went to another Lazy Dog at 120th and Federal prior but did not eat there. Chris never mentioned a Rockies game that night. He got a young babysitter that night who was 17 years old and he could only stay until 10 p.m. He came to her about 5:30 p.m. They drove her truck, Toyota 4Runner, to dinner. He left to be home by 10. He text messaged her later that night and said he had stopped on the way home to get cash to pay the babysitter. During their dinner on Saturday, they discussed his fitness. Chris lost 13 pounds during the time they were dating. She had no concerns that he was using any other drugs. Shanann was in Arizona on August 11, 2018. Chris told the mistress she was on a business trip. He said she was coming home really late on Sunday. Chris told his mistress Celeste is allergic to nuts. Chris told her she had an EpiPen for the allergy. There had been an argument while in North Carolina regarding ice cream and nuts that she had been exposed to that involved Shanann and Chris's family. Shanann was very upset about this event. Chris told his mistress his own family ignored him while in North Carolina because of this. Chris said his mother and Shanann did not get along prior to this event. Chris never told his mistress if Shanann ever had any medical conditions. His mistress said her relationship with Chris was healthy. She said they were intimate during this relationship. She said Chris told her he loved her, and she said she told him she loved him as well. Chris also wrote he loved her in cards, and she felt he was genuine when he said he loved her. She said Chris sent flowers and cards and had become very attached to her during their short relationship. The mistress said her friends never knew about him because it was like he was with two women right now. If he had been divorced, she did not believe she would have told anyone about him. It wasn't fair to his family for him to have an affair. The mistress still didn't know what was truthful or what was a lie. If she would have known some of this, she would have not engaged in any of this in the first place. The mistress began to cry when talking about Chris's children and the situation overall and Shanann being pregnant. She said she could not understand how anyone could do this. She was obviously upset, and we discussed her getting mental health assistance. The interview with the mistress continued, and she stated, "We discussed a phone call between the mistress and Chris between 9 p.m. and 11 p.m. on Sunday night. She was not certain what they talked about during this call. She recalled hearing a television on during the call. She said there was not a television in the basement, so she did not know where he was and why he was watching television when it was so late. She said this is odd behavior for him. She recalled thinking Chris may have been waiting up for Shanann to get home. During this call, he told the mistress he had to go to the field, not the office, on Monday morning. He said he had to go check on a valve where there was a quote-unquote release. He said he would not see her in the morning. She said this is not uncommon, but typically he goes to the office. She said usually 3 to 4 days a week he goes to the office. She recalled on Sunday, August 12th, Chris went to a birthday party with the kids. She recalled his kids had a water balloon fight. She did not know whose home he went to. The mistress said she went to the Denver Museum of Nature and Science on Sunday with her family. She never saw Chris on Sunday. The mistress recalled there is a camera on the front door of Chris's home. She said he never used a key to access the house. She could not recall the access pad on the front door, but said Chris never gave her an access code to access his home. She did not have an access code to the home security system. The mistress recalled next talking to Chris on Monday, August 13th. She said she did not hear a lot from Chris that day. He texted and said it was a busy day. Nothing he said was alarming that day. She said she left work at 3 p.m. according to her time card. She returned home to a good friend, Jim. In parentheses, she refused to provide his last name and said he does not know anything about this event and does not know Chris. Jim was her house guest on Monday. She said Jim is a very close friend, but they do not date each other. She recalled getting home and Chris texted her something about his family being gone. She thought the text came in at about 3:45 p.m. She felt the text message was purposefully sent at that time by Chris. This is the first text he sent the mistress about his family being missing. Chris also asked his mistress to call him. She said this text did not concern her at first, but when he asked her to call him, she became concerned. The mistress called Chris at about 4 p.m. They had a short conversation with him, saying the police were at his house. Chris was texting, saying the police were there and Shanann's friend Nicole was there and she had called the police. Chris said Shanann's friend Nicole was upset and the cops were searching his house. She recalled Chris saying he and Shanann had a disagreement and he told his mistress Shanann was going to a friend's house. The mistress remembered thinking maybe Shanann just left. Chris then told her that Shanann's cell phone and purse were still at his house. The mistress thought maybe Shanann was in a rush and left the stuff behind, but knowing Shanann was always on her phone, she found it strange. She recalled at this time that Chris had previously told her that the house was going to be put up on the market the week of August 13th, 2018. Chris said Nicole insisted they call the police. The mistress said she does not know Nicole. Chris said via text that he thought his wife was with someone and she will be back tonight in text messages. During a phone call, they discussed Shanann leaving, and he again said he thought she was at a friend's and would be back tomorrow. He made it sound like Shanann was just upset and had just left the house. He also said the kids were gone. Chris said he was going to go to work tomorrow. The mistress told him to stay home and help the police. Chris was worried about Shanann seeing his truck, so the mistress told him to move his truck so she would not be scared to come home. She told him to have a friend with him, so if they had a conflict when she returned, there would be someone there. She also told Chris if someone was not there and they got into an argument to turn on his phone and record the argument. The mistress recalled Shanann not coming home on Monday night. She said Chris told her a story that Shanann had asked him to wake her up before he left for work on Monday morning. Chris said he went to get her up. Shanann is usually sleeping when he leaves, according to the mistress. He said she woke up and they got into an argument and she was being pretty mean. He told Chris that she is pregnant and said the kid was not his. The mistress said he was playing like he did not know Shanann was pregnant, even though she was 15 weeks pregnant. The mistress asked Chris if he believed Shanann was pregnant, in parentheses, as she did not find out until Tuesday in the media that she was. And Chris said she was showing in North Carolina. The mistress said Chris was just saying all this stuff to lie to her and protect their relationship. Chris never said what time the argument started. Chris woke Shanann because she asked him to. The mistress believed Chris told her Shanann came home about 2 a.m. The mistress said Chris's story was believable and said he thought Shanann may have said she was pregnant out of spite. At this time, the mistress still believed Shanann had only left the house with her children. Chris never asked his mistress to come to her home. On Tuesday, August 13th, the mistress asked Chris multiple times where his family was. He said he did not know and they were not home. If you're wondering why I said Tuesday, August 13th, that is not a misread. It actually says that here, so I do not know if that actually occurred on Monday, August 13th, or Tuesday, August 14th. Chris said he had a friend named Dave who was a policeman. Chris said he called Dave and asked him to sit outside his house, and he agreed to do so. Chris also mentioned his friend Nick was coming by his home. She had never heard Dave's name prior to this conversation, and she knew a Dave was involved in the investigation now. On Tuesday, during her lunch break, she reviewed the media and found Shanann was 15 weeks pregnant. She said she was concerned because a 4-month pregnant woman would be showing, and she knew Chris was lying. She recalls primarily texting with Chris on Tuesday. She did not recall talking with Chris. She confronted Chris about Shanann being 15 weeks pregnant. Chris asked if this ruins everything with their relationship, and she told him to focus on his family. She told Chris she knew the child was his and was not from an affair of Shanann's. She continued to encourage him to go find his family. The mistress confronted Chris to stop lying. She said on Tuesday she started to become suspicious of Chris. She said he did not seem to be concerned as he should be, and he was more concerned with their relationship. The mistress does not believe Chris ever went to look for his family. She recalled speaking with Chris on Monday night and he was sleeping. She thought this was strange due to the situation with his family. The mistress challenged Chris about Shanann being pregnant. Chris then told her Shanann was pregnant with his child. Chris continued to ask her if their relationship was okay after telling her that the child was his. He also expressed concern for his wife and children during these text messages. The mistress asked Chris to delete his text messages to keep their relationship secret from his friends. She told Chris to contact her after his family is found. The mistress said she questioned Chris what he had done, and he said he had done nothing. The mistress texted Chris and said if he had done something bad, he was going to ruin his life and her life. Chris responded saying he had not hurt his family. The mistress said that this was their last text message on Tuesday. At this time, the mistress started to think Chris had hurt his family as he lied to her and Shanann had not returned. In parentheses, she does not have car, purse, EpiPen. The mistress said she was scared because she did not know who Chris was anymore. The mistress recalled another conversation on August 13th, Monday. Chris told his mistress Shanann had left her wedding ring at the house. Chris asked Nicole how much she thought the ring was worth. She responded by telling him to pawn it. He said he was going to get the ring appraised. Chris also mentioned North Carolina and he wanted the separation, and previously had said Shanann wanted the separation. The mistress said she saw the interview with Chris and said his eyes looked different and it looked like he did not have a soul. She said he looked like a different man. The mistress spoke with her father about the situation and they decided to come to the police. She said she wished she had come in earlier, but it took her a few days to process what was going on. Chris never said anything about hurting his wife or his children during any of these conversations and had never done so during his relationship with his mistress. She thought if she was not in Chris's life, his family might still be alive, but not permanently. She does not believe he just snapped. She does not think she is the only catalyst for this event. She does believe that being in Chris's life may have accelerated the process. She said Chris and Shanann did not get along well, and their financial life was also troubling. She said Chris was struggling with finances, and now he had a third kid on the way, and she does not know if he could afford another kid. Shanann was not responsive to this financial trouble. The mistress said Chris always told her he wanted a third child and wanted a boy. The mistress said she is very financially stable, and Chris said he did not know women like her existed. She feels money is the biggest catalyst for this event happening. The mistress recalled Chris never told her about his bankruptcy. She could not think of any answer for why Chris would have hurt his children. The only thing she could think of was that the kids may have seen him killing Shanann, so he chose to kill them as well. She said Chris loved his children. I inquired with the mistress about her friend Charlotte. A text message was located between Charlotte and the mistress that appeared to reference her dating another person. Charlotte is engaged and is her closest friend. The mistress said she never dated any other person, and Chris would have no reason to think she was dating anyone else. She said Chris was never jealous about her seeing anyone else. She said she had talked with other men on eHarmony, but never had dated any of them. Agent Tim Martinez asked questions of the mistress. She said the following. Chris was always more into her than she was into him. Chris and his mistress had discussed long-term plans. She asked him if he did not have the big house, what would his house look like? Chris said he would have a smaller ranch house. They agreed to have more of a simple life. Chris and his mistress talked about marriage offhanded. These were not deep conversations. She first met him in May or early June. Chris had worked for Anadarko for 5 to 6 years, and he did supervise people. Chris never complained of any medical issues. The mistress never thought he had any mental or psychological issues. She does not believe Chris was dating anyone else. Their relationship was sexual shortly after they met and remained sexual consistently. Chris has sent her photos of his penis and other workout photos. Chris and his mistress were last intimate at her home on Saturday, August 11th. They were intimate when Chris picked her up prior to going to the Lazy Dog and immediately following getting back to her home from the Lazy Dog restaurant. Chris mentioned that Shanann never let him openly communicate. The mistress knew of no other stressors other than finances. Chris mainly complained that Shanann would never listen to him. Chris also said Shanann would talk shit to him in front of his children, and the children were starting to repeat it. Chris said he tried to ask Shanann for something, and she said shut up, and he did not know anything. His children started to repeat this, and it made Chris very sad, and this is when he realized he needed to separate from her. Chris always told his mistress Shanann was a good mom. There was no indication of any abuse or any other concern. The mistress asked multiple questions regarding the upcoming legal process and her employment. No further questions were asked of the mistress, and the interview was ended. Nothing further. Investigation continues. And then there's various attachments here of what looks to be the interview evidence sheet. It says Watts card 1 through 6. That must be cards that he gave his mistress. There's her phone waiver and also a property sheet. It doesn't mention what that property is, but I imagine it is the cell phone. So I'm sure that was a lot for all of us to take in at once, and certainly there is much there that we could speculate on. I really want to boil down my thoughts anyway to 2 main points. That is, one, that certainly as you go through this, I know this is a summary, so we can't take it for exact words, but we do have the video interview. And there's certainly a lot of things that don't seem to add up. Certain contradictions in her statements versus either other statements or actions, such as supporting him to go back to fix his marriage, but then also continuing to see him and saying that she talked to him all the time, and certainly continuing their intimacy. Certainly forgetting what was talked about on that Sunday night, but certainly remembering a lot of other types of things, such as the kids having a water balloon fight. Another is she told them to stay home and help the police, yet she deleted her texts, which could also have helped the police. And that's really point number 2. And maybe the more critical one is the potential destruction of evidence. You know, those text messages could have served 2 purposes. One being corroborating the story that she's going to be telling, but also even being good for Chris if he were to have been innocent. Perhaps those text messages could have helped corroborate any story he may have come up with. We know that's certainly not the case. But those 2 things are really what stick out to me. It leads you to believe that maybe something else is at play here, such as maybe knowing a little more than she knew. Or obviously, we don't know, and I do choose to trust the law enforcement, and we'll see where that takes us. So that's where we're going to end this part with this interview, finishing page 577. Next, we are going to get into the polygraph and interview with Chris, conducted by Tammy on August 15th. So that certainly will be a very interesting part. Lots more to cover, but I appreciate, as always, everyone being here and listening and supporting. With that, we dedicate this to Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico. God, please look over and bless the Rusek family. This is The Diplomat. Have a great day.